Tying another wet fly today. This is a yellow Sally, and this is the third in a class that I'm doing on the 5th of October, tying some Ray Bergman wet flies. This one has a duck quill tail to it, as well as matched wings, which is a little bit more complicated for some people, but there's some simple techniques that make this a little bit easier to master. As I said, this is the third fly in the class that I'll be teaching. I do have a fourth one that will be published a week from today, called the Emma, but I will not be teaching it in class. So this is the last one for the class. It's a basic, simple wet fly. Again, it has a lot of the same pieces and parts. If you looked at the other two videos, you'll see the tags pretty much tied in the same way, done the same way. Floss body, the rib is done very similar, even the tail, the throat, and the wing on this. If you can master these matched wings and working with the duck quills, then there's, you can do any wet flies that are out there. So that's the yellow Sally, and we'll go ahead and get started tying. We'll begin the yellow Sally, as we have with a lot of these flies, by putting our hook in the vise and debarbing the hook. This is a Mustad 3399. It's a size 6. We are going to be using a floss body, a yellow floss body, so I'm going to start with some white Danville 6/0 thread for the base here underneath the floss. I'm going to attach it behind the eye of the hook, right the back of the head and or the beginning of the body, and wrap down the hook shank to the point of the hook. At this stage, I'll put in my tag. This is a Danville size 16 and 18. It's a very, very fine gold and silver Mylar tinsel. I'm going to attach this with the silver side out just on the far side of the hook. And then I'm going to proceed in 12 touching turns down the hook shank. "12 will put me where the thread is hanging somewhere right between the base of the barb or the point of the barb, and that's generally where the tag on these wet flies starts. This is a very, very common feature of these wet flies, is some sort of a tag like this, and it generally is going to be tied in always the same, starting in the same position, 5 wraps back, 5 wraps forward, and then securing that. I'll secure that with a couple of wraps, and I'll tie off the excess. And part of the reason that I'm doing it, I flipped the hook over as I applied that, is because it's easier. I don't have to navigate around the bobbin as I'm wrapping the tinsel around the hook. It's much easier, as well as this stub right here of Mylar will get wrapped down with floss and everything, but it's not on the upper side of the hook up here where it might interfere with the tail of the fly. So at this point, we're going to put in the tail of the fly. I'm using some yellow duck quill feathers for this, and I want to cut out anywhere from 3 to 4 barbs per slip for our tail. I don't want a super wide tail. I want to keep it fairly narrow, so I'll use 3 to 4. I've got those matched up, and I'm going to measure that to about a shank length. You're better off erring on the side of a little longer than shorter on these. I'm going to attach that and secure that in right on top of the hook shank. You want to, I find that often when I tie those in, they kind of get pressed together, and you'll want to split those up If nothing else, just to make certain that the tips are even, that they're right up on top, and that they spread out and have the right shape you're looking for. At this point, I'll tie in the rib. I'm using the same Mylar tinsel as I did before. I'm going to secure that the same way right on the far side of the hook shank. I'll draw the tag down so it's somewhere up in the body here, and I'll just secure with 1 or 2 wraps working backwards. For the body on this, I'm using a Danville 4-strand Rayon chenille, or not chenille, Rayon floss in yellow. But I'm only using 2 of the strands. It's a 4-strand floss, and for these smaller flies, 4 strands tend to be a little bit big. If you were to tie this, say, in maybe a 4 or definitely a 2, something really large, I might use the 4, but for this instance, I'm just going to use the 2 strands. I'm going to secure this the same way by bringing it up under the thread over to my side of the hook shank, and I will pull to the left to draw those down so that those butt ends are going to be inside of the body just behind the head. Secure that with 1 wrap. I'm now going to flatten my thread so that as I bind all this down and wrap forward up to the end of the body to then apply the body material, my thread is nice and flat. It just aids in having a smoother body, that's all. You don't necessarily have to if you don't want to flatten your thread, but it does just help it be a little bit smoother there. Careful when you're wrapping this forward not to apply too much tension. The more tension on the thread as you are wrapping this around, the more you're going to start pulling the material around to the other side, and we don't want that lashed down in a spiral. Believe it or not, the very small, subtle defects in the underbody here will translate up into the resulting body. So with that lash down and our thread sitting here right back of the head space, the end of the body, I'm going to go ahead and start applying my floss body. I'm going to stroke this out to get all of the fibers under the same tension. Generally, as you bring it around here on this side, they're all under the same tension, and therefore you won't run into issues with them separating when you are advancing this up the hook shank if you don't hit the point of the hook. I want to have these in overlapping turns. Occasionally you're going to get a fiber that breaks on you, kind of flies away. Wouldn't be too concerned about that. We can trim that off. Also remember, these flies, once you start catching a few fish on these flies, this floss is going to start getting frayed. The hackle and the wings and the tail will all start getting kind of beaten up. But that's all right. They'll still fish well. So we wrap that in a nice smooth body up to the eye of the hook. If you have rough hands, they're going to shred this floss a little bit, as I think mine did a little. You can use an emery board on your fingers and your hands to smooth those out so that you're less likely to fray that floss as you're wrapping it forward. You also want to be careful when you are stroking the floss and trying to get it all smooth. You don't want to pull too hard, because believe it or not, you can actually pull the tail and everything off to the other side of the hook shank. So now we'll apply our rib. When I start to apply this, it flips over the gold side. I want to get 5 evenly spaced wraps up the hook shank. You'll find that generally the 3rd wrap is going to be halfway up the hook shank. Just take your time with it. Make certain you're getting all of these in a nice even space. There's 5. Your 6th wrap, when you bring it around, should be right on the side of your head space. Careful that that 5th wrap doesn't pop down like that one just did. Just take your time with it. Make certain you're getting the fly the way you want it to be. I'm going to trim away the excess on that rib. Put a couple wraps in to secure that down, and now I'm going to change over to my black thread. I'm using a black 6/0 Danville. You could do you could whip finish the white thread if you want, and then cut it off and reattach the black. I just do it this way because I accomplish the same thing in one step. I'm going to run this back to generally about the back end of my head space. That will help to define just where the head's going to be. And now I'm ready to tie in the throat. We're now ready to tie in the throat for our fly. Some people refer to this as a beard or like a false hackle. The throat on this is going to be a yellow Schlappen feather. You could use a strung rooster if you want to. The Schlappen's a little bit more webby. There's more barbules on it. It's a little bit longer fibered, so it flows a little bit more. It's generally preferred for the false hackles on these for the throats. I'm going to stroke the fibers out here perpendicular to the stem. That's going to get all the tips here even for me. Then I'm going to peel those off, and I will get some from the other side of the feather such that when I put them together, I will have a nice grouping of Schlappen hackle fibers for the throat of my fly. I'm going to measure this so that the tips go back to the barb. We do want them to be past the point of the hook, somewhere around the barb, not past the bend of the hook. I'm going to bring them up underneath the hook shank using a pinch wrap here. I'm going to pinch and roll my fingers forward, and then using a loop technique, I'm going to pull straight up, roll my fingers back a little bit, and put in 3 or 4 turns to secure that. That will bring it nice tight up right in the middle. You'll have a nice fanned out throat. I'll hold on to the butt ends right up under the hook and slide my scissors right up to cut that off. You'll notice that my hand here, I don't know if you can see that in the camera, but my finger here is pushing on the bobbin to push the bobbin and the thread out of the way so that I don't accidentally cut the thread. But I get my scissors up as close as I can, and I cut those butt ends out. Occasionally you miss one, and that gives me a nice clean butt end to the throat. Just going to tidy that up just a little bit. This will also help develop a little bit of a platform for tying in the wing. So our yellow Sally is looking pretty good. There we go. For the wing, I'm going to be using the same duck quill, yellow duck quill, and I have cut out 2 slips that are about 2/3 the width, maybe no more than the gap of the hook, but these are about 2/3 the gap of the hook. And I've got a right and a left here, and I'll match those tips up. The idea is to match those tips up really nice and neat. As you can see with this one, I have the slip that's facing you is a little narrower than the back one. That's fine. I can simply take my bodkin in here and peel out a couple extra. It's not as critical that these be an exact width as much as you definitely want them to match up. I'm going to put these in place with the short fibers here at the bottom going back about to the bend of the hook. That puts the tips about halfway down the tail or so. Again, using a pinching loop method. I'm going to alter this a little bit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my thread forward, roll my fingers forward here, and then I'm going to let the thread slide to the back side here. What that does is I hold on to the butt ends here with my right hand and the thread is just hanging. If I push down with my right hand, it's going to assist in bringing those fibers straight down to the hook shank. I may have lost one there. And that's going to help my wing to compress nice and neat right up in front here, as opposed to kind of roll and squish down. I'm going to get in with my scissors and trim away the excess, those butt ends. Ideally, your duck quills are going to be a little bit longer, so you have a little bit more to work with there, but that works. Once that's done, I'm going to crisscross wrap a little bit here on these butt ends to try and just lash those down a little bit. Once I have those down, I'm going to come up to the eye of the hook and start wrapping in the head, working my way backwards. You want to try and minimize the size of the head as much as possible, but at the same time you want to make certain you have everything covered up. So with that done, that tail keeps with that done, I will flatten out my thread as I have on the other flies, and to complete the whip finish. This will be a 7 or 8 turn whip finish, and this just simply smooths that head out just a little bit more. I find that I generally need to only have about 3 coats of hardest hull on these flies, as opposed to 4 if I don't flatten out the thread right before I make the head of the fly. That finishes the head of the fly, and we'll split our tail back up here. There we go. You may have wrapped that floss back here just a little bit down on top of that tail. Wing's a little bit narrow, but the nice thing is it's pretty symmetrical. It's right down straight on top of the hook shank. It doesn't flare out too bad, so actually that works pretty well. At this stage, I'll put some fly tight on the head of this, and this will soak down into those thread wraps, securing all of that together very well. And in a moment, as soon as that dries, we will start putting some hardest hull on there so that we have a nice glossy, lacquery looking head to our yellow Sally. So the fly tight has dried up on the head of our yellow Sally, and that's all nice and secure now. So I'm going to start the process of putting 3 or 4 coats of hardest hull, which is just a clear, hard, protective finish on top of this the head. Traditionally, these are finished with a black lacquer. It gives them a nice, rich color. Because this is clear, it basically will have the same black look as lacquer because of the black thread. You could certainly go ahead and use some black lacquer on these if you want. I'm just going to put the first initial coat on here. Even though this looks pretty thick and it looks like the fly is done, what you'll find is that it will shrink back onto the thread wraps. So it'll take 2 or 3 different coats to get this looking nice and finished. It just helps to protect the head a little bit. I think it makes the flies look a little bit better. And that's the yellow Sally. Again, this is the 3rd fly in a class that I'm teaching on the 5th of October, and this is a matched wing fly. A lot of wet flies have matched and matched and married wings. It also has a more traditional duck quill tail on it. So this is a very basic wet fly. If you can get this kind of fly down in terms of the tail and the wings, then there's pretty much any of them that you can do. But the yellow Sally is it's a great fly for tying. It's good panfish fly, even bass on this, as well as trout. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this video and not only learned a new pattern, but maybe learned some new techniques and a few new skills. If you like this video, please hit that thumbs up button below. You can support Dressed Irons by hitting the subscribe button, and don't forget to hit the bell icon so you get notified when new videos are published. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. Until next time, remember, it's fly time. If you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong.